Hello and welcome to the One Life Church devotional series where we cover the entire Bible in 20 months. Well, today's chapters are Joshua chapter 5 and Romans chapter 10. In Joshua 5, we see Joshua having to circumcise all the men that had not been circumcised in the desert. They have a Passover. And then verse 13, Joshua is near Jericho and a man stands in front of him with a drawn sword. And Joshua asks him this question, are you for us or against us? The man says, I'm neither for you nor against you, but I'm commander of the Lord's army. Interesting to note, God is on his side. It's presumptuous for us to think that he's always on our side. When you're having a little squabble with your wife, when you're having a sports event against somebody else, arrogant to presume God's on your side. Abraham Lincoln, the president of America, said this, I'm not asking the question, is God on my side? I'm asking the question, am I on his side? Because he is always right. And so that's what we get out of the first few verses. But then the question is, who is this angel, this messenger, this commander of the Lord's army? Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, what message does my Lord have for the servant? And the commander of the Lord's army replied, take off your sandals. The place where you're standing is holy. What ground would be holy? Who would be allowed to be worshipped? Most theologians say this is Jesus. This is a pre-incarnate Jesus presenting himself to Joshua, Jesus himself. You see, we're prohibited to worship angels, so there's no ways Joshua would be in reverence, bowing down, ground called holy, allowed to worship angels without the angel correcting him. This is Jesus, which puts an entirely different spin on how you read this chapter. Trust you enjoy it. But Romans chapter 10 is where we're going to now. And we see Paul's longing for the Jews to be saved. He says, brothers and sisters, my heart's desire and my prayer to God is for the Israelites that they may be saved. You see, the fact was even then, and far more now, that the Gentiles get saved far easier than the Jews. And, it's all the more crazy when you think the Jews had the head start. They had the first revelation. They had the Messiah. So the question is, whose fault is it? Is it God's fault? It's definitely not God's fault. 1 Timothy chapter 2 says this. This is good and pleases God our Savior, who wants all people to be saved and to come to the knowledge of truth. You see, God's heart is that everybody gets saved. He didn't prepare hell for people. The Bible makes it very clear. He prepared hell for the angels that have fallen and for the devil himself. If people go there, it's because they choose to go there. In the book of Psalms, the psalmist says, do not harden your heart. When God shows himself to you, do not harden your heart. If you harden your heart like Pharaoh did, remember Pharaoh, we read about him yesterday, chapter 9. He hardened his heart again and again and again. In fact, it even says in Genesis, God was patient with him. He hardened his heart. Eventually, God just lets you go the way of your hardened heart and you reject him. And that's basically what the Jews had done. They'd got it all wrong. They were zealous. He says here in verse 2 and 3, they were zealous for God. They were looking for righteousness, but they weren't submitting to God's righteousness. No, it says here, you don't have to go up to heaven to get it. You don't have to go and get it from hell. No, it's near your mouth. It's right there. You declare with your mouth, verse 9 says, that Jesus is Lord, and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, and you'll be saved. You'll be declared righteous. This is what Martin Luther discovered. Martin Luther was just like many of the Jews today and even in those days who try so hard to be righteous. Martin Luther used to beat his body to try and rid himself of sin to the point of unconsciousness until he realized that the righteousness that brings salvation, the righteousness that God is looking for, is belief in him, trusting him, putting your trust in him. And then Paul goes through the excuses that the Jews have, and one of them is that they haven't heard properly. But verse 18 says, but I ask, did they not hear? Of course they did, he said. Their voice has gone out into all the earth and their words to the end of the world. So he addresses this issue in verse 14. He says, how then can they call on the one they haven't believed? And how can they believe in the one they haven't heard? And how can they hear unless someone is preaching to them? And how can one preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. You see, the bad news is this, is that religion, and you can see this building behind me here, been there since 1907, a traditional building in the middle of the Karoo. We on our journey up to Bloemfontein. Now, when I passed it, I thought, how many people, very sincere, just like the Jews of old, very sincere, looking for their own righteousness by beating themselves, by obeying laws, where Paul makes it very clear, send this good news. You beautiful feet, send this good news that you got to believe in Jesus, trust in him. That's where righteousness comes from. And that's what he's trying to bring to his Jewish people there in chapter 10. He's saying, my longing is that they all stop this nonsense of trying to justify themselves and believe that Jesus Christ has justified them.